Global National with Donna Friesen.
In Ukraine's capital tonight, there is great unease. The sound of explosions and air raid sirens. Kyiv is under attack. Airstrikes and missiles targeting the city of 3 million people. Ukraine's president, who says the international community has left his people to fight alone, posted this video with his top staff saying they will stay in Kyiv despite the risks.
Всі ми тут, наші військові тут, громадяни суспільства тут, всі ми тут. Захищаємо нашу незалежність, нашу державу. І так буде й далі.
Ukrainian officials say they've handed out 18,000 assault rifles to volunteers. And Russia's president called on Ukrainian forces to put down their weapons and turn on their government.
Похоже, нам с вами будет легче договориться, чем с этой шайкой наркоманов и неонацистов, которая засела в Киеве и взяла в заложники.
NATO is preparing a combat-ready rapid defense force and has deployed more troops not to send to Ukraine, but to NATO countries nearby. These are British forces in Estonia.
Peace on our continent has been shattered. We will defend and protect every ally against any attack and every inch of NATO territory.
British Defense Intelligence released this map showing how far Russian forces have advanced into Ukraine from the north, east, and south, and reveals how they are closing in on the center of the capital, though facing stiff resistance from the Ukrainian army. Today, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced new sanctions targeting the Russian president, his chief of staff, and Russia's foreign minister. And Trudeau says Canada supports removing Russia from the SWIFT banking system.
He cannot expect to overturn and end 75 years of peace with a violent and unprovoked attack on an innocent neighbor and still expect to be able to benefit from the financial systems and economic opportunities that very peace has created over the past 75 years.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Late today, Ukraine's president said the fate of the country is being decided right now, that it will be a very hard night. We begin our coverage in Kyiv. Associated Press reporter Joe Federman is there. Joe, you're talking to us from the central part of the city near the shelter of your building where you're staying. It's another anxious night for people there. What are you hearing and seeing?
Yeah, it's been anxious almost around the clock. Our day began at about 4 in the morning with air raid sirens, and we have spent the entire day going up and down the stairs into the basement seeking shelter. I've lost count how many air raid sirens we've experienced today, and in many cases, shortly after you hear the sirens, you hear explosions in the background. The explosions earlier in the day and yesterday were far off in the distance, and this evening, just in the past couple of hours, you hear the explosions much closer, much louder, much more intense. So the sense is that the Russian forces are closing in on us.
Yeah, well, we've heard that from others as well, that the Russians are advancing towards the city center. What are you hearing about Ukrainian resistance, both from the army and from conscripts who have been given guns?
Yeah, the resistance seems to be taking place more in pockets, I think. It's become very clear over the past 24 hours that Ukraine is heavily outgunned by the Russians. We knew this, but we were expecting some sort of resistance, but the Russians have been moving in very quickly. So what you hear are about sort of isolated incidents where the Ukrainians put up resistance in one place or another. You hear about these sort of citizen people buying guns and getting very basic paramilitary training or whatever. But the overall trend is that they are heavily outgunned and the Russians are moving in on them.
You know, the country's president pleaded for the world, to the world for more help. What is the mood among people there about the international reaction?
Yeah, we were speaking to some university students today, and they were talking about this. And I think the way I would describe it, they do not. Somebody was asking me if they feel, if Ukraine feels abandoned by the outside world, and I wouldn't go that far. I think the key word here is disappointment. They appreciate the backing, they appreciate the condemnations, the backing at the UN, the financial aid, the sanctions on Russia. They appreciate all of that stuff, but they want more. And what they want is military aid. They want the world to really come to their defense, and they don't see that happening.
All right. Joe Federman from Associated Press in Kyiv tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Russia's war in Ukraine has provoked a refugee crisis. Thousands are fleeing the Russian assault and heading for neighboring countries, including Poland. That's where our Gomansingh is tonight. Crystal?
Donna, it is very busy here at the Przemysl train station, which has been turned into a Red Cross site. Now, some of the people who have arrived here have been on a journey that has been taken almost an entire day. They are tired, but they are all telling us that they're grateful to be safe, but they know their family members back home simply aren't. The Kremlin is looking to squeeze the life from Ukraine by capturing its roots, Kyiv. The Russian invasion now laying siege to the capital and those of the nearly 4 million residents who are left. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says civilian sites are being targeted and innocent people are being killed. Apartments and homes devastated by rocket attacks. Still, many Ukrainians are standing their ground, fighting for their homeland despite being outnumbered and outgunned, including Zelenskyy showing himself in the streets of Kyiv amidst false reports he had fled. Here we are, says a defiant Zelenskyy on the streets of Kyiv. His message, the citizens are here and we are here. We defend our independence. Zelenskyy may now be Putin's priority target, seeking to destabilize Ukraine from the top down. The president also urging the world to act and add tougher sanctions against Russia. Right now, he and others say Ukraine is alone. Underground, people seek shelter, hiding, even sleeping in metro stations built to withstand Cold War attacks. Others have chosen to run. The United Nations estimates more than 50,000 Ukrainians have already sought safety elsewhere, the majority in Moldova and Poland. Some border crossings are now lined with vehicles, others with families fleeing on foot in the cold. This young woman says it took her nearly 24 hours to get to Poland.
And really don't know what to do. I can pray God to save our hospitals and that Russian will stop bomb Ukraine, and hope my native people will be safe and I can meet them again.
Others have tried to leave on trains. The scene becoming so frantic at times, guards fired rounds into the air to regain control of frantic crowds. Many have no choice but to stay put and hope, even as Russia continues to advance, that they'll be okay. The longer this war goes on, the more people will flee and seek safety in places like Poland, and that will mean the more services will be needed. For now, there is a lot of effort, a lot of help, but no one knows how long this will all last. Donna?
All right, Crystal in Poland tonight, thanks. For the first time in its history, NATO is activating a rapid response force and deploying it to NATO countries neighboring Ukraine. It says it's preparing should Vladimir Putin decide to extend his invasion beyond Ukraine. And Ukraine's plea for tougher sanctions against Putin and Russian interests were met, at least in part, today. Jackson Proskow reports.
In this perilous moment, NATO is on edge.
The Kremlin's objectives are not limited to Ukraine.
The sobering view of Russia's intentions prompted an urgent meeting of the alliance and activation of a rapid response force, including an elite high-readiness unit. Finland and Sweden were invited to the security meeting in defiance of Vladimir Putin. Members promised military and humanitarian aid to Ukraine, including anti-aircraft systems and weapons. They can only hope it's not too late.
We are sending a very clear message to Russia that we provide support to our partner Ukraine?
Attention! Fears of a broader conflict in Europe have already prompted NATO to bolster its numbers along the eastern flank with Russia. In Latvia, American troops arrived as further deterrence, joining a Canadian unit already stationed there.
That other our allies, starting from Canadians and ending with other Europeans, are with us, is a good signal that Putin don't mess with us.
The international pressure campaign extends directly to Putin himself. A move to disconnect Russia from the SWIFT global banking network has growing support, and personal sanctions are being levied against the Russian president and Russia's foreign minister by Western governments, including the US and the EU.
The only leaders in the world who are sanctioned by the European Union are Assad from Syria, Lukashenko from Belarus, and now Putin from Russia.
There are still limits on how far the West will go to defend Ukraine. NATO allies are firm they will not engage in direct combat unless attacked. There's no talk of establishing a no-fly zone despite requests from Ukrainian officials, and none of the actions announced so far have succeeded in stopping the Russian invasion or convincing Vladimir Putin to back down. Jackson Proskow, Global News, Washington.
Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister says the sanctions Canada announced today against Putin and those close to him are designed to suffocate the Russian regime. It's one of three approaches the Canadian government is taking to support Ukraine. Our chief political correspondent David Akin is tracking the details of this. David.
Yeah, well, Donna, let's start first with the military. Canada is going to put an artillery battery in Latvia, will deploy 2 naval frigates, a surveillance aircraft, a cyber warfare team, and up to 460 new soldiers, all under NATO command somewhere in Eastern Europe.
Allies are all resolved and resolute that we are there to protect Europe's eastern flank, to demonstrate that the alliance is strong and ready to respond.
But it will be at least a month before much of that is in place, Donna.
And David, what about sanctions? Who and what is Canada targeting?
This is a pretty big list, and it now includes Vladimir Putin himself, 32 members of Putin's inner circle, and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and all 351 members of the Russian parliament that voted to recognize the independence of those eastern regions of Ukraine, 27 key financial institutions, 4 Ukrainians that Canada has identified as pro-Russian agents of disinformation, and today, 57 people in Belarus.
The world has responded in an unprecedentedly united and coordinated way to respond to Vladimir Putin's grave mistake.
Canada also supports Russia being removed from SWIFT. That is the global financial network used by international banks, and kicking Russia off of SWIFT will make it very difficult for any Russian entity to engage in any kind of international financial transaction, Donna.
All right. And David, we should point out that hasn't happened yet. But David, what is Canada doing to help Ukrainians who want to leave their country?
Well, the government has put in place a number of measures to rapidly issue visas, even for those without a passport. Processing fees are being waived, more consular staff is being assigned to the region, and the government says Ukrainians already here in Canada who have work or study permits that are expiring can have them extended. That said, Ukraine is now forbidding any male from 18 to 60 years of age from leaving the country because Ukraine needs all the manpower it can get. So it's unclear just how many refugees we will see here. Donna.
All right, David in Ottawa, thank you. Coming up, how Ukraine is gearing up for a long battle. Russians saying no to war. They continue to defy their president, risking arrest to protest the war in Ukraine. Protests like this are illegal in Russia, and political opposition leaders are either poisoned or in jail. At least 1,700 people were arrested in the protests on Thursday. Well, the West keeps saying Vladimir Putin will pay a price for this invasion. Sanctions will take time, though, to take hold and have a real economic impact. That means Putin needs a victory fast. Eric Sorensen has been talking to experts about what Russia's next moves might be.
It is a full-scale war that many experts just didn't believe Russia would start. President Vladimir Putin, in one fell swoop, demonstrated his country's military might and instantly isolated Russia from much of the world.
Like a lot of people, we had concluded that a full-scale invasion of Ukraine was irrational.
This former Canadian ambassador to Russia says the costs are too great. Retaliation on Russians' banking, travel, and economy, and the lasting harm to the country's stature.
The array of sanctions will increasingly, I think, isolate them as something of a pariah state internationally.
At a minimum, then, Putin needs a swift military victory.
It's pretty clear that he wants the whole country. It looks like occupation and annexation are the objectives.
But in recent years, Ukraine has built up its military and its resolve. Ukrainians seem prepared for a prolonged conflict with ongoing guerrilla tactics if necessary.
The Ukrainian government will want to put as much resistance as they can to make the costs of invasion as high as possible.
Why would Putin risk it? Russia's neighbor does not threaten it militarily. But it's hard to ignore that Ukraine is becoming a model of progress right next door to Russia's authoritarianism.
Every day, Ukraine is becoming a bit more democratic, a bit more prosperous. So this is very much about undoing a possible alternative that is becoming a real existential threat to him and his kleptocratic regime.
There's already discontent among Russians. Tennis star Andrei Rublev wrote, "No war, please," on a TV camera lens. And remember how popular Alexander Ovechkin was with Vladimir Putin. Maybe not after Ovi sent out this message. Others are willing to be arrested for protesting, and the war has only just begun.
Russians will not be happy with body bags of their sons coming back to Russia. So I don't think this will be a popular war.
Experts didn't see how war could advance Russia's interests and believe Vladimir Putin may realize that soon enough. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Ahead, war and oil prices soar. What's the connection to the conflict? Russia is the third largest exporter of crude oil, and the invasion of Ukraine has led to a spike in crude prices. A U.S. State Department official said today the U.S. will not sanction Russian crude oil because that would harm American consumers and not Vladimir Putin. Heather Urix-West explains the connection between conflict and oil.
This is not a war over oil, but make no mistake, Russia's energy exports represent considerable leverage.
The reality is that Mr. Putin has played the world, democracies and free markets like a fiddle. And in many respects, we've not only bought into it, we created the situation.
That's because when it comes to oil, the global energy market is already incredibly tight, with demand only just starting to keep pace with supply. And as one of the world's biggest oil producers, Russia accounts for just over 10% of oil globally.
So even if we lose, 10% of Russia's production, these prices could, easily go up to $140, $150.
It's why Western countries have hesitated to impose sanctions against Russian energy exports. So how did it come to this?
The market generally right now is very short oil. Ever since COVID and even before, there has been not enough investment happening to keep up with demand.
Canada, of course, has oil. Alberta sits on the third largest reserve in the world, but the industry is still without viable means to get that product to world markets. Keystone was cancelled, and the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion doesn't come online until at least late next year.
If we had a willing federal partner and a realistic U.S. energy security policy, we could completely displace U.S. Russian oil imports.
Global reliance on oil already threatens the climate. Now it's a factor in the Western response to war in Ukraine and Russia's escalating security threat as well. Heather Urix-West, Global News, Calgary.
How far would you go to defend your country? Next, the Ukrainians who are resisting the invasion. What's happening in Ukraine, a democracy attacked by its nuclear-powered neighbor, is giving lots of people pause for thought about what they would do, how far they would go to defend their independence and resist the Russians. Despite the seemingly impossible odds, many Ukrainians are unwilling to step aside. As the sounds of war overrun Ukraine and people run for cover, in a country where men are being told to fight, these sounds are hard to bear. Here, a man can hardly break away from his daughter and his partner. For those who remain, there are deep signs of defiance, people who are unwilling to yield. This woman confronted heavily armed Russian soldiers. "You are occupiers and fascists," she says. "Take these seeds and put them in your pockets. At least," she says, "sunflowers will grow when you die here." The sunflower is Ukraine's national flower. And on this rocky island in the Black Sea, the same will to resist. A Russian warship blared an ultimatum at a small team of Ukrainian border guards. "Lay down your arms and surrender," they said. "Otherwise, you'll be bombed." Their response? Russian warship, go F yourself. Across the country, people are choosing to fight rather than flee. This apartment block in Kyiv took a direct hit. Inside, Oksana Golenko was thrown across her bedroom. "I was completely confused," she says. "I heard screams, sounds. I got up and saw all the windows smashed." She and her daughter are now picking up the pieces, and under her breath, she's singing Ukraine's national anthem. "Long live Ukraine," she says. And that is Global National for this Friday. I'm Donna Friesen. We leave you with songs and signs of solidarity with Ukraine across Canada. Landmarks are being lit up in the colors of Ukraine's flag. Canadians can also donate to help. The federal government is matching donations to the Canadian Red Cross Ukraine Humanitarian Crisis Appeal, dollar for dollar, to a maximum of $10 million. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves.